In 2013, a man sitting in his home office in Texas uploaded a small digital file to the internet.
And this wasn't, a software guy or a musician.
No, he called himself a crypto-anarchist. And that file contained the blueprints for the Liberator.
The world's first fully functioning one-shot plastic pistol.
Exactly. And within just a few days, while the U.S. government was just scrambling, trying to scrub these things from the web, they'd already been downloaded over 100,000 times.
100,000. It's an unbelievable number for something so controversial. No serial numbers, no background checks.
No metal detectors, just a design floating out there in the ether, ready to be materialized by anyone with a printer.
It really does feel like science fiction. This whole idea, the democratization of manufacturing, where the factory is no longer this huge building. It's a machine on a desktop in a spare bedroom.
Right. And for years, we've looked at 3D printing with this sort of wide-eyed wonder,
We've all seen the viral clips.
Totally. The 3D printed houses going up in 24 hours, the stories of doctors printing custom prosthetic limbs for kids for like a fraction of the cost.
There's a real Star Trek optimism to it all.
There is this idea that you can just dream of an object and then watch it, layer itself into existence. It's magical.
But then the conversation shifts.
As you mentioned the word proliferation or non-proliferation in a room full of diplomats, and you can just feel that giddy excitement for the future, it just gets cold.
Because the same technology that can print a heart valve can, with the exact same precision, print the components for a missile.
Or an untraceable firearm. And suddenly we're in this strange paradox where the very thing that promises to liberate our global supply chains also threatens to just completely dismantle the frameworks we've used for decades to keep the world safe.
And it raises these impossible questions. How do you track a weapon that has no paper trail?
Right.
How do you regulate a technology that is, by its very nature, designed to be unregulatable?
So today, that's what we're doing. We're stepping past the wow factor of the hardware to look at the far more complicated reality of a world where making anything is now just a click away.
It's this ultimate convergence of the digital and the physical, isn't it? We usually talk about cyber warfare as, something that happens on screens, hacking a bank account, taking down a power grid.
Right, it's all virtual.
But this is different. This is code becoming kinetic. We've got a massive stack of documentation in front of us here. Everything from State Department legal filings to sociological treatises by Durkheim, and even, technical manuals from the deep web.
And the mission for this deep dive is really to get at the why. Why did this whole movement start? Why has it persisted, despite every single attempt to crush it? Mm-hmm.
What happens when the monopoly on violence, which, the state has held for centuries, just dissolves into a cloud of metadata?
Well, why is exactly where we have to start. Because if you look at the timeline, the reaction from the establishment was immediate. It was terrified. But the reaction from a certain subset of the population was, well, it was almost religious. It wasn't just, oh, cool, I can print a gun. It was, finally, I can opt out.
Opt out is the perfect phrase. This was never just about ballistics. It's about the decay of institutions. We are watching, in real time, a complete breakdown in the trust between the governor and the governed.
I want to get right into that breakdown. There's a narrative we came across that I think really sets the stage. It's not a happy story, but it's a necessary one if you want to understand the psychology at play here.
Okay.
I heard a story recently about a small, sterile apartment in a sprawling American suburb where the only light came from the flickering blue glow of a 3D printer. A young man, let's call him Elias, sat watching the nozzle move with this hypnotic precision.
And he wasn't a criminal in the way we'd normally think of one.
He was a disillusioned engineer who felt the system had forfeited its right to protect him. He was downloading a file, a blueprint for a Liberator pistol that had been banned, re-uploaded, and mirrored across a dozen decentralized servers.
So for him, every layer of plastic being laid down.
It was a physical manifestation of his noble sense of betrayal. He's looking at the news on his second monitor, seeing UN officials in these expensive suits discussing regulatory frameworks. He just laughed.
To him, those institutions were just ghosts.
Yeah. Ghosts haunting a world that had already moved past them. The digital proliferation of these files wasn't just a security flaw, it was a tombstone for the idea that a central authority could still maintain civil order. And listening to a story like that, I can't help but feel this deep sense of unease. From, a professional perspective, Elias represents a frightening shift toward total institutional irrelevance. While we have to uphold the principle that only the state should have a mandate on violence for public safety, you also have to acknowledge the raw, bitter emotion that's driving people like him.
That betrayal he feels. It's a symptom of a bridge that has already collapsed between the governed and the governors.
A noble sense of betrayal. That specific phrasing.
It implies that Elias and, the thousands of people like him, they don't see themselves as breaking the law. They see themselves as upholding some kind of higher law that they believe the state has abandoned.
Exactly. But let's ground this in the reality of 2013 for a second. Elias is sitting there watching this nozzle move back and forth. He's printing the Liberator. We should be really clear about what this thing actually was, because the media hype at the time made it sound like he was printing a clock.
Oh, not even close. Yeah. It was not a Glock. From a pure engineering standpoint, the Liberator is fascinatingly crude.
Yeah.
It's essentially just a block of ABS plastic. You've got 16 parts in total.
16! And 15 of them are printed.
15 are printed. The 16th is a nail. A common galvanized roofing nail that you could buy at Home Depot for pennies. That acts as the firing pin.
And ABS plastic. Whatever, acrylonitrile, betadine, styrene. It's literally the same stuff Legos are made of.
The exact same stuff.
Which is, it's durable for a toy, but trying to contain the pressure of a .3A0 ACP cartridge exploding, that feels like you're asking a lot from a Lego brick.
It is asking a lot. The early tests were pretty disastrous. The barrel would often explode or warp significantly after just a single shot. The thermal stress and the pressure curve of a bullet firing are just immense.
So it wasn't a practical weapon?
Really. But the genius of the Liberator wasn't its durability. It was the proof of concept. It proved you could manufacture a lethal device with absolutely zero specialized tooling. No milling machine, no lathe, no forge.
Just a printer and a nail.
Just a printer and a nail.
Yeah.
And that is what absolutely terrified the State Department. They didn't go after Cody Wilson, the guy who uploaded the file for owning a gun. They went after him for exporting it.
Which is just a fascinating bit of legal gymnastics.
This is where you fall down the legal rabbit hole. The State Department invoked ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations.
And these are what, Cold War era rules?
They were designed to stop someone from shipping a crate of Stinger missiles to a Soviet proxy state. They made the argument that by uploading the file to a server where a foreigner could download it, Wilson was technically exporting ammunition.
This is the central conflict, isn't it? Because code is speech. That's been pretty well established in court cases, like Bernstein v. Department of Justice back in the 90s with encryption.
Right.
So if code is speech, then the First Amendment protects it. But if code is a weapon, then ITAR regulates it. Which one is it?
And that is the fundamental conflict of the digital age. The government tried to treat a CAD file like a physical object. They issued a takedown order.
And Wilson complied, right? He took the file down.
He scrubbed the file from his site, defcad.com. But this is exactly where that institutional decay we were talking about comes in. The government actually assumed that deleting the file from the source would stop the spread.
Which implies a fundamental, almost willful misunderstanding of how the internet actually works.
It's laughable, honestly. In the few days it was up, 100,000 people had already downloaded it. It was immediately mirrored on the Pirate Bay. It was on Mega. It was being shared in private torrent swarms.
You cannot delete data once it has propagated.
It's like trying to recall a rumor after everyone in town has already heard it and told two friends. The State Department was fighting a 21st century swarm with, 20th century tactics, and they lost.
And this gets to that concept of intangible transfer of technology, or ITT. This is what these big international bodies struggle with, right? Like the Wassenaar Arrangement.
Yes, the Wassenaar Arrangement, this massive multilateral export control regime. It's supposed to track dual-use goods, things that have both civilian and military applications.
But it was written for a world of shipping containers and cargo planes.
Wassenaar works when you can put a checkpoint at a border crossing and have a customs agent open a trunk.
Yeah.
Oh, you have a gyroscope for a ballistic missile in there. Yeah. You're under arrest.
Right.
But ITT means the technology transfers intangibly. It moves as packets of data over fiber optic cables at the speed of light. There is no checkpoint. Wow. There is no border guard who can inspect your hard drive and differentiate between a CAD file for a blender and a CAD file for an AR-15 lower receiver.
So the treaty at the individual level is effectively unenforceable. And that brings us right back to Elias in his apartment. He sees all this. He sees the State Department flailing, trying to ban a PDF file. And it validates his entire worldview. The noble betrayal isn't just a feeling anymore. It's the realization that the adults in the room, the UN, the feds, all of them, they don't actually have control anymore. Or maybe they never did.
It's a crisis of competence. If the state's primary job is to provide security, and they demonstrably cannot stop the proliferation of weapons because the technology has outpaced their regulations, then their authority is hollow. It's just a performance.
And Cody Wilson, the creator of The Liberator, he played into this explicitly. He's a self-described market anarchist. He wasn't trying to make money selling guns.
No, his goal was much bigger. He was trying to break the system.
He called it wiki weapons at one point, didn't he?
The idea was to lower the barrier to entry for lethal force to zero. Literally zero.
And if the barrier to entry is zero, regulation is impossible.
It becomes a mathematical impossibility. It's an accelerationist philosophy. He wanted to push the system until it snapped, forcing society to confront the reality that we are all now individually responsible for our own defense because the state physically cannot guarantee it for us anymore.
It's the genie out of the bottle cliche, but it's actually more like entropy. You can't put the energy back into the system once it's been released. It just spreads.
But, you know, as revolutionary as it was, the Liberator was, frankly, a bit of a toy. It was a political statement made of plastic.
Right.
The movement didn't stop there, though. It evolved. It got much darker and much, much more sophisticated. And that really brings us to the sociology of the people who are doing this now.
The shifts from a political statement to a full-blown lifestyle.
Exactly.
And we have another story here that I think captures this new phase perfectly. This isn't about a lone guy in his apartment anymore. This is about a subculture.
A very specific, very online subculture.
Yeah. I saw a thread online about an anomie commune, a group of individuals living in a tech hub city who had completely, utterly checked out of society.
Checked out how?
They didn't vote, they didn't pay traditional taxes, they used crypto for everything, and they spent their nights in these makerspaces printing untraceable components for firearms.
Wow.
One member described this feeling of profound isolation, a sense that the shared social norms of his parents' generation, what we often call civic responsibility, it felt like a foreign language to him.
And in that landscape, the 3D printer becomes their new focal point.
It became their new god. They were practicing what sociologists call anomie, which is a state of normlessness where the old rules don't apply, but no new ones have taken their place yet.
So by printing these unregulated weapons, they weren't just making tools.
They were declaring their independence from a society they felt had already abandoned them. It was this decentralized, crypto-anarchist rebellion born not out of a specific political goal, but out of a vacuum where a community used to be.
It's easy to just look at that and see chaos.
From a standpoint of political stability, their actions are incredibly reckless. But when you read their manifestos, you have to try to understand the underlying despair. This isn't just about guns, it's about the collapse of the social glue that holds us all together.
So from a security perspective, it's clear that no law is going to fix a problem that is, at its root, about the death of our shared civic soul.
The death of our shared civic soul. That's a haunting diagnosis of the situation. It really leans hard into that concept of anomie. And I want to dig into that because anomie is a word that gets thrown around a lot in, intro sociology classes. But in this specific context, it feels incredibly urgent.
It's not just academic anymore.
No. This goes back to Emil Durkheim in the 1890s. He was writing about suicide and industrialization, right?
Yes, exactly. Durkheim observed that when society changes too rapidly, when you move from a small village where everyone knows your name and your family to a massive anonymous industrial city where you're just a cog in a machine, the collective conscience breaks down.
You lose the shared norms, the rules that tell you how to behave.
And that state of being unmoored, of not knowing what the rules are anymore, or even if there are any rules, that is an anomie.
And then decades later, the sociologist Robert Merton came along and added a twist to it that I think fits this 3D printing world perfectly.
You're talking about Merton's strain theory.
Yes.
He argued that anomie occurs when there's a disconnect, a gap between the goals that society sets for you and the means that society provides for you to achieve them. Okay, so society tells you the goal is be safe, but you feel the state cannot keep you safe. And then the institutional means to achieve that safety yourself, say legal gun ownership, are heavily restricted or denied to you. That creates what Merton called strain.
And when you experience that strain,
You have a few options. One is to reject the institutional means and create your own. You innovate.
that's the maker movement in a nutshell for these specific groups. They're literally innovating their way out of the social contract.
And it leads directly to this idea of agorism. This is a key term in this subculture. It comes from the Greek word agora, the marketplace.
So it's about economics.
It's about counter-economics. The philosophy is that you achieve a libertarian society not by voting and not by fighting a violent revolution in the streets, but by simply engaging in black and gray markets until the state withers away from irrelevance.
You starve the beast.
You starve the beast, you use Bitcoin so they can't track your money, you use encrypted apps like Signal so they can't read your messages, and you print your own goods, including weapons, so they can't control the means of production. You live in that anomie commune from the story.
There's a quote in the research stack from a guy named Scott. He's described as this bow tie wearing heckler at some conference. He stands up and says, "The state does not wake us up. The state did not build this."
It's a complete rejection of the "you didn't build that" narrative from a few years ago. It's pure, unadulterated hyper-individualism.
It's empowering for them, I'm sure, but it's also incredibly isolating. It creates these atomized little bubbles.
And inside those bubbles, the technology is accelerated so far past the original Liberator. It's not even in the same league. We have to talk about the FGC-9.
The FGC-9.
Right.
Yeah, even the name is a political statement. It's a middle finger. Fuck gun control 9mm.
But physically, this thing is a quantum leap. The Liberator was a toy. The FGC-9 is a semi-automatic pistol-caliber carbine. It looks like a submachine gun you'd see in a movie.
And the most critical part, the thing that makes it so different.
It uses 0 regulated gun parts. Not a single one.
Okay, let's geek out on this for a minute, because the engineering here is genuinely impressive, regardless of your feelings on the ethics of it.
It's brilliant in a terrifying way.
In a traditional firearm, the regulated part in the US is usually the receiver. In Europe, it's often the barrel and other pressure-bearing components. So how do you make a barrel without a machine shop? You can't print a barrel that holds 30,000 psi of pressure out of plastic. It would just vaporize.
So the FGC-9 design, which was popularized by this online group called Deterrence Dispensed, uses a process called electrochemical machining, ECM.
Okay, this is the bathtub science part of the story.
It is literally bathtub science. You take a piece of hydraulic steel tubing, standard stuff you can buy on Amazon or at a hardware store for industrial piping. It's just a pipe. It's not a gun part.
Right.
You 3D print a plastic mandrel, which is basically a guide that has the rifling groove spiraled onto it. You insert that mandrel into the steel pipe along with some copper wire.
And
You hook the whole contraption up to a bucket of salt water and a cheap power supply, like a car battery charger. The electricity flows through the salt water and eats away. It etches the metal where the plastic isn't touching it.
this in a couple of hours.
In a couple of hours, you have a rifled barrel that's capable of reasonable accuracy.
Wild. They replaced a $100,000 rifling button machine with a bucket of salt, some water, and a 3D printed plastic stick.
And that is what they call the IKEA effect. The release of the FGC-9 wasn't just a file dump. It was a comprehensive documentation package. It had detailed PDF manuals, troubleshooting guides, slickly edited videos, with music-synced assembly montages.
They lowered the cognitive barrier to entry. You don't need to be a machinist or an engineer anymore. You just need to be able to follow a set of instructions.
Like building a bookshelf.
And the figurehead behind a lot of this was a guy who went by the name J. Stark 1809.
A very tragic and complex figure. He was a Kurdish German man living in Europe. He felt the specific pain of his people, the Kurds, being disarmed and slaughtered in the Middle East, while he himself lived in Germany, where gun ownership is incredibly tightly restricted.
He had that famous quote,
"I would rather die than be a slave."
For him, the 3D printer was a tool of emancipation. It was the only way he saw for people to achieve true freedom from oppressive states.
But this brings us right back to the dark side of anomie. Normlessness doesn't just mean freedom for me. It means there are no rules for anyone. And we saw the ugliest version of that in Halle, Germany.
The Halle synagogue shooting. The attacker there used a homemade firearm. It was partially 3D printed components based on some of these earlier designs, like the Ludi submachine gun, but it was combined with 3D printed adaptation that he'd found online.
And he wasn't some noble libertarian fighting for freedom. He was a right-wing extremist trying to kill Jewish people. Exactly. And that is the inescapable paradox here. The very same tool that J. Stark built to, in his mind, liberate people from tyranny was used by a wannabe tyrant to attack a minority group.
The technology is neutral.
It's a pure amplifier of the user's intent. If the user is a freedom fighter in Myanmar, it's a tool of liberty. If the user is a neo-Nazi in Germany, it's a tool of terror.
And the state can no longer act as the filter. It can't decide who gets the weapon based on a background check.
The filter is gone.
That lack of a filter obviously scares domestic police forces, but if we zoom out from that, it absolutely terrifies the Pentagon. Because this isn't just happening in basements in Germany anymore. It's happening on active battlefield.
This is the strategic pivot. We are moving from the individual maker to the organized non-state actor, and even state actors themselves.
Which brings us to our third narrative for today. This is where the rubber really meets the road, or I guess where the plastic meets the high explosive.
A much better way to put it.
Imagine a clandestine workshop in a region under heavy international sanctions. It could be a rogue state or a territory controlled by a non-state actor. For decades, Western technological superiority was maintained by controlling the supply chain.
Right, you stop high-grade steel and specialized parts from reaching the wrong hands.
Exactly. But now I've heard these accounts of technicians using industrial-grade additive manufacturing to bypass those regimes entirely. They aren't waiting for a shipment of turbine blades that will never arrive.
They're just printing the turbine blades and the receiver groups they need right there in-house.
This democratization of production is a complete nightmare for traditional defense analysts. It means the gatekeepers of international security have literally lost the keys to the gate.
A rogue actor with one high-end printer and a USB drive with a file on it can now challenge the strategic monopoly of a superpower,
rendering decades of non-proliferation treaties virtually obsolete in a single afternoon of printing.
And when you analyze these strategic shifts, the gravity is just immense. We are entering an era where the monopoly on force is being disrupted by a memory stick.
So while it's vital to support international efforts, like those led by the UN, to prevent the spread of conflict, we have to be realistic. The technology has outpaced the diplomacy.
The feeling of betrayal that the public feels about their safety isn't just a sentiment anymore. It's a reflection of a world where the old walls have become porous and the elite institutions are just struggling to find a way to plug the holes.
Rendering non-proliferation treaties virtually obsolete, claim. But when you look at the evidence, it really seems to back it up.
It's the end of the choke point strategy. Since the Second World War, we've controlled global power by controlling stuff. You want to build a nuclear weapon. Okay, you need miraging steel for the centrifuges. We sanction the steel.
You want to build a modern jet fighter. You need nickel superalloys for the engine. We track the global supply of nickel.
Exactly. But additive manufacturing, or AM, it just changes the entire equation?
It does. And we are seeing two distinct versions of this playing out on the battlefield right now, a top-down version and a bottom-up version.
Let's start with Ukraine, because that feels like the global laboratory for 21st century warfare right now.
Ukraine is unique because it's this high-intensity, state-on-state conflict where both sides are using what are essentially maker tactics.
On the one hand, you have the U.S. military shipping industrial 3D printers, these massive room-sized machines, to the rear lines. They are doing what's called maintenance, repair, and overhaul, or MRO. Okay. Take the M777 howitzer. It's a beast made of titanium. If a specific small bracket breaks on it or a firing pin snaps, that entire gun is a 9,000-pound paperweight.
And in the Gulf War in 1991, you'd have to do what? Fly apart from a depot in Alabama all the way to the front?
Right. A logistics chain that could take weeks. Now, they can scan the broken part of the front, email the file, and print a new one in high-strength steel or Incanal inside a shipping container in Poland or Western Ukraine. The gun is back firing in a matter of hours.
That's logistics. That's the kind of thing that wins wars. But the bottom-up stuff is even weirder. You mentioned the Druk Army.
The print army. This is a decentralized network of thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of regular Ukrainian volunteers with consumer-grade printers. The same Ender 3s and Prusas that people in the U.S. have in their garages to print toys.
And they're printing what?
They're printing fin stabilizers for grenades.
I've seen pictures of these. They take a standard VOG-17 grenade launcher round, or even just a soda can filled with C4 and ball bearings. They clip on one of these 3D printed fin assemblies and they drop it from a commercial DJI drone.
Yes, from the so-called Baba Yaga drones. These are heavy-lift agricultural drones that have been repurposed as makeshift bombers. What's terrifying for military planners is the iteration speed.
What do you mean by that?
In the U.S. procurement cycle, if you want to redesign a grenade fin, it takes 5 years of committee meetings and millions of dollars in contracts. In Ukraine, a drone pilot drops a grenade, sees from the video feed that it tumbled incorrectly, and he texts a guy in a basement in Kyiv.
And that guy tweaks the CAD file.
Tweaks a file, prints a new version overnight, and it's on the front line the next morning. It is trial and error warfare happening at the speed of software.
And then you contrast that with a place like Myanmar. That's an even more desperate situation.
Myanmar is the FGC-9's ultimate proving ground. The anti-junta rebels, the People's Defense Force, are fighting a fully equipped military that has jets, tanks, artillery.
And the rebels started with, what, bolt-action pipe guns?
Literally homemade shotguns.
Yeah.
Now, they have clandestine factories in the jungle, churning out FGC-9s by the thousands. They're 3D printing the frames for large drones using fiberglass reinforced nylon. They are matching state-level firepower with plastic and ingenuity.
It's the democratization of lethality in its purest and bloodiest form.
But the part that really scares the big-picture strategic thinkers in Washington isn't just more guns. It's the high-end stuff. It's missiles.
If you want to build a liquid-fueled rocket engine, the really hard part is the geometry, isn't it?
It's all about the geometry. You need these incredibly complex cooling channels running inside the nozzle walls to keep the whole thing from melting into slag. Trying to mill those channels out of a solid block of metal is incredibly difficult. It requires million-dollar 5-axis CNC machines that are heavily regulated under export controls.
But with a metal 3D printer.
You just print it. You print the cooling channels inside the wall as you're building the wall. The complexity is free. A rogue state, let's say, hypothetically, a sanctioned actor in the Middle East or a country like North Korea, doesn't need to import the complex machinery anymore. They just need one good metal printer and the digital file.
And that printer is dual use.
That's the absolute nightmare for intelligence agencies. You buy the printer legally to make, say, dental implants or custom turbochargers for cars. Perfectly legitimate. Then one day you switch the metal powder, you load a different file, and you start printing a rocket nozzle.
The intent is completely invisible until the missile's on the launch pad. We have to touch on the WMD angle briefly because the source material goes there, and it's chilling. Chemical and biological weapons.
You hear the term pharma on demand, printing specific medicines for soldiers in the field.
Sure.
But the same principles of microfluidics and chemical synthesis apply. If you can print a tiny custom chemical reactor vessel that's perfectly tailored to synthesize ibuprofen, you can also print one that's perfectly tailored to synthesize VX nerve agent.
And the biocurious movement.
This is the DIY biohacking scene. The source material mentions hackers who figured out how to modify old HP 5150 inkjet printers from the 90s.
Like the ones that were in every office?
Those exact ones. They flesh out the ink, sterilize the print heads, and they fill the ink cartridges with a suspension of live cells. They are printing tissue scaffolds. It's brilliant for biology research.
But the
implication is, if you can print living cells, can you print a pathogen? Can you distribute a viral load through a printed matrix? It lowers the barrier for developing bioweapons from a national laboratory level down to a garage level.
And nuclear. Please tell me we're not at the point of printing nukes.
Not the core physics package, no. You still need fissile material, enriched uranium or plutonium, and you can't print that. But you can print components for the centrifuges needed to enrich the uranium.
So,
a gas centrifuge is basically just a very high-strength tube that has to spin at incredible speeds without tearing itself apart. The material science and the manufacturing precision have always been the bottleneck. 3D printing with advanced metals and composites bypasses some of those manufacturing bottlenecks. It just weakens the entire non-proliferation regime.
So in the space of this conversation, we've gone from Elias in his suburban bedroom feeling sad about society to a full-blown geopolitical crisis where decades of treaties are becoming obsolete.
It feels like we are watching the structural disintegration of the entire 20th century security architecture.
The classic safety versus liberty trade-off is the core philosophical debate of our time. But we usually think of that debate happening in a legislature. Should we pass this law or that law?
Right. It's a political process.
But what 3D printing does is it removes the legislature from the loop entirely. The technology itself forces the liberty side of that equation to the absolute maximum.
Because you can't stop it.
You can't stop the signal. Listener, we aren't just talking about rebels in a jungle somewhere or spies in a rogue state. This is about the house next door.
That's the real takeaway here. We are all accustomed to a world where truly dangerous things are rare and hard to get. We unconsciously rely on that scarcity for our safety.
You take comfort knowing that even if your neighbor is angry or unstable, he probably doesn't have a submachine gun or a vial of nerve agent.
But we are rapidly moving into a world of abundance, an abundance of manufacturing capability. an abundance of lethality.
And the institutions that we pay to protect us, the police, the State Department, the UN, they are structurally, fundamentally unsuited to deal with this new reality of abundance. They are trying to catch water with a net.
Exactly. The monopoly on manufacturing, which was the real basis of state power for 200 years, is dead.
We often talk about these major historical shifts, the Industrial Revolution, the Information Age. This feels like the de-industrial revolution, the radical decentralization of the physical world itself.
It changes the fundamental power dynamic of the entire planet.
And that leads us to the final sobering reality that I think we all have to accept. The era of controlling the world by controlling the supply chain is over. We now live in a reality where the most dangerous things in the world can be summoned from the ether, layer by layer, in a room that no government knows exists, by a person who believes that very government has already failed them. The factory is no longer a building. It is a file, and that file is everywhere.